Welcome to the Kingsbridge is Simple and Secure podcast, where we will discuss no building threats, no people threats, no third-party supplier threats, and no systems attacks. All these combine to create chaos for your business, and they will be battled by King Phoenix and his shield.
Hi, welcome to the KISSBCP podcast. I'm your host, Roswitha Firth. Like and subscribe to the KISSBCP podcast wherever you listen or watch. And now, on with the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the KISSBC podcast. I'm your host, Roswitha Firth, and with me today is Leona Cohen. Before we get started, let me just say a few brief words. Thanks for joining us. Our podcast is hosted by Kingsbridge BCP. And if you haven't already done so, please take a moment now to like and subscribe wherever you find your podcast. Thanks for joining us today. Hi, Leona. Thank you so much for being our guest. I really appreciate you coming on for the episode today. Leona has been working in business continuity, crisis response, and emergency management for about 20 years, primarily in the fintech industry. So we have about similar amount of time doing what we do. Tell me a little bit more about what you've done and where you'd like to go.
Great. Thank you so much, Roswitha, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Yes, I do have 20 plus a little bit more years, primarily fintech, right now just technology. And I've really learned so much and I've grown so much in this industry. And there's always something new. So even though I've enjoyed how much I've grown and how much I've learned, I would still like to grow and learn more, maybe approaching it from different angles, maybe doing perhaps supply chain management or public sector, or just a different angle, because there are so many different industry that we are part of. We are a sub-industry in and of ourselves. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's funny you mentioned supply chain because I was never particularly interested in supply chain and business continuity. It was just one of the things, but it wasn't like my passion. And then during the pandemic, reading so much about everything that was happening, I became really fascinated with all of the supply chain impacts during the pandemic and how that ties into business continuity in every way. And so I can understand your interest because I have a similar interest now as well. But today we're not actually going to talk much about supply chain. What we are going to talk about is, even if you don't have your business continuity plan written yet, hopefully you started back in January when we advised you to, or you started on your BIA. So our next step now is to talk about, okay, so you have your business impact analysis. How do we take what's in the BIA and pull out appropriate recovery strategies for your company? And that's what Leona's here to talk about today with me. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let's get started.
Great. Thank you so much. And yes, you're absolutely right. I do hope people have completed their BIAs or at least are working on them, because as has been mentioned in previous episodes, the BIA is foundational to everything else you do afterwards. And so what I'd really like to emphasize today are really three things. One, keeping it simple. Two is, what are the scenarios that we plan for in our business continuity plans? And then three, I'd like to touch upon some of the information that you can use in your BIA to then start developing your recovery strategies.
That sounds great.
So first of all, keeping it simple, keep it concise, keep it easy to understand. It does not have to be complicated. Run it by your mother or your father or a friend or another family member or a new coworker. They should be able to understand it. That's how clear it and simple it should be. So
Great
when planning,
advice.
thank you. When planning recovery strategies, we really look at 3 to 4 very high level disaster scenarios,
Mm-hmm.
because doesn't really matter what the disaster is per se. They all eventually end up being either or a combination of loss of facility, loss or shortage of staff, loss of the technology that you depend on to do your work, and if you have critical vendors, critical third parties that you rely on to do your
Mm-hmm.
work, then that would be the fourth one, your dependencies. So going to what you pull from your BIA, first and foremost is the processes that you've identified and their corresponding recovery time objectives. Your recovery strategies ultimately need to meet your recovery time objectives. And if they don't, then you could identify that as a gap and you could work towards resolving that. But go ahead.
If I may interject something
Please.
here, especially for people who are watching and listening today who may be relatively new to the field, the supposition here is that your BIA document has already been signed off on by whoever's required, your BCM, your vice president, possibly the executive steering committee, whoever's doing the sign off needs to sign off, because the business units can wish all they want for a 5-minute RTO for something. That does not mean they're going to get it. That is just flat out reality. There are tons of constraints, predominantly money, to achieving RTOs. So let's assume that you've already gotten those approvals, and now we're talking about RTOs and the strategies that are appropriate for them. I just wanted to mention that because that's a given for us, but not necessarily for someone who's sort of diving in for the first time with a project like this.
Right. And that's really a good point too, because even within one department or one business unit, they could have processes with a shorter RTO. A lot of people use the term criticality. I also use the term more time sensitive at time of disaster. It's the key word. Whereas they may have other processes that they can put on hold.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps the recovery strategy is have employees that normally do this less time sensitive process facilitate with the more time sensitive
Mm-hmm.
processes. That's a recovery strategy in and of itself, is reallocating your resources.
Yes.
So again, yes, you've identified your processes and the respective recovery time objectives in your BIA, and it's been signed off. So that's first and foremost, what are your recovery strategies for your different processes? Next, you're really looking at your dependencies. What do you need to do this process A, process B, process C? And first look at your technology dependencies. So your BIA is informing you of what you need to do your job. So then you need to make sure you're addressing that in your recovery strategies. For the scenario of loss of technology that you depend on to do your job, is the unspoken rest of the sentence. What do you have a workaround? What is your recovery strategy? Do you really need all of that technology you mentioned in the same amount of time that that process must be up and running? You actually may list 5 different types of technology, but it may be that 2 of them
Mm-hmm.
you really do need immediately, 3 of them perhaps not. You could mention this in your recovery strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if you have workarounds, what are they? And I'm going to be honest and say in some cases, it's simply we need to wait for that technology to be restored.
Yeah.
Our hands are tied. So be it. Those are conversations to have later down the road. But it's really acknowledging anything that you can do. Just write it down.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good suggestion, because I think so much of the process gets focused on getting the technology up sooner. And that's an investment heavy exercise there, for which funding has to be approved, and that process can take a long time. So anything that you can do on the front end while developing recovery strategies to identify, as you said, resources that can be reallocated to support the most critical processes, even if that's resources that normally do some later stage that are coming in to help catch up on a backlog of data entry into whatever you do have available. And then secondly, as you had mentioned, the workarounds that can be done. And those two right there, yes, if you have lots of people, of course, the first one is not going to be helpful. But if it's a different type of disaster that doesn't impact people, but impacts some other of the four options, then yeah, if you can reallocate resources and if you can find workarounds that you can document beforehand, that right there is a partial bridge for the time period until that technology can come up, or until you get something approved that will create the technology recovery that you're actually desiring for that RTO.
Exactly.
Great
And sometimes
points.
it may be as simple as, can you at least answer phones? If you are a department that receives calls from clients or whomever, can you do that much? And then, as you said, create a log of things that need to be addressed afterwards. So I would consider that as a workaround worth documenting.
Absolutely.
Another is your critical vendors or third-party suppliers. Typically, it's going to be they supply products or services. And what if they have an outage? What do you need to do if this other company that you rely on has an outage? Again, pulling from your BIA, who are these companies, first of all? And if there's an issue with the product or services, do you need to contact them? If so, add that contact information to your recovery strategies and who's responsible for making that call. So really think of information. What do I want in my fingertips at time of disaster? Do you really want to have to look around for all your vendors' contact information when you've got a lot of chaos going around? Or would it be just nice to have it right there in front of you? So again, that's a type of thinking that I really like to emphasize when helping people develop recovery strategies.
I'm wondering whether it's worth spending a few minutes talking about two different possibilities in what you just brought up. Because I'm thinking there's two types of supplier or vendor outages. The one occurs when the rest of your business is functioning normally, and the other one happens either because of the same disaster that your business is facing, or something that happens to happen at the same time. Like, you have a hurricane and they have a wildfire. But I think it's worth talking about. So handling what happens if your business is functioning normally, there's a recovery strategy for that supplier. And do you have a backup supplier, for example? And what's in the contract as far as what they're obligated to, and do they have financial penalties? And have you even seen that contract versus they're having a disaster, same or different, the same time you are? Did you want to maybe add a few words, especially to the second half of that? I think
Sure.
that's definitely can get really complicated.
And that's a really good point. Because as you're developing these recovery strategies, even after you did your BIA, you're doing some research, business continuity professionals doing research in the background. And yes, hopefully you're looking at these things. What are the contractual obligations of the vendor? Where's the vendor located? I mean, you nailed it. Are there other alternative sources available? And have you identified those? If not, it's a great time to think about it when you're developing your recovery strategies and develop that further to see what your other alternatives can be if you have not already done that. So I really like that point.
And then as far as like if your vendor has a disaster at the same time you do, that goes with some particular challenges, I think. And what would you recommend as far as recovery strategies in that regard, that because everybody's going to be, it's all hands on deck kind of a situation, and then they have an outage as well. What do you do?
Exactly. And I think a lot of that is your research in advance of, does your vendor have an alternate location? Do their recovery strategies enable you to continue their business? They may be in the same location. They may themselves have alternate providers. We're talking, your second level, third level, third party service providers. It could go deeper, and you could do quite a bit of research. Are they able to shift their work to another location? So it really is taking a look at your third-party risk management and working with your third-party risk management department, if you have one, at your place of employment, or if you're self-employed. Do you really ask these questions of your third parties? You may both be all hands on deck, but your recovery strategies can be very different.
That's a great point. So we're going to move into a break, and we'll see you for another episode in 2 weeks. Thank you for joining us for part 1 of using your business impact analysis to develop your recovery strategies. Thank you, Leona, for joining us. And we will see everyone back hopefully in 2 weeks. Thanks so much. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thank you very much.